This is the strongest hurricane in the history of the USA, and this is the fire that burned half of Chicago. And what about the heat that melted the wheels of cars and killed several thousand people? Yes, these are the craziest catastrophes in the history of America, and the havoc they left behind. You'll see it in this video. And let's start with the largest volcanic eruption in the history of the USA. On May 18, 1980, Mount St. Helens erupted, turning the area around the volcano into a zone of complete devastation. Look, it's a real natural apocalypse. More than 200 square miles, covered with green virgin forests, clean mountain streams, and tranquil lakes, turned into a monotonous gray wasteland. Dreadful, the entire area was littered with broken wood, covered with smoky gray plains, and strewn with a landslide of debris under a layer of ash. The then president of the USA, Jimmy Carter, visiting the disaster area, compared it to the surface of the moon. Scientists studying the aftermath of the eruption were amazed by what they saw. They predicted that nothing would ever grow here again, not to mention the restoration of the animal world. But look now, these grim forecasts turned out to be wrong. Within 3 years after the eruption, scientists discovered that 90% of the original plant species were regrowing in the blast zone, such a catastrophe, and nature was able to heal itself so quickly. Isn't that astonishing? Look at these horrifying images of destruction. In 1900, Galveston was the jewel of Texas, the largest port city, where millionaires' mansions stood and some of the country's first electric streetlights were installed. But everything changed on September 8th, when a hurricane with winds of 140 miles per hour hit the coast, causing a 13-foot storm surge. The island, home to 37,000 people, was practically wiped off the face of the earth. According to various estimates, from 6,000 to 8,000 people perished, making this storm the deadliest in U.S. history. Among the terrible consequences of the storm were trolley tracks torn from docks and crashing into buildings, and the relentless wind, described by survivors as 1,000 little devils screaming and whistling in your ear. But that's not the worst part. The biggest tragedy occurred at the St. Mary's Orphan Asylum. 93 children and 10 nuns found shelter here. The wave lifted the building from its foundation and washed it away. In desperation, the nuns tied themselves with bed sheets to 8 or 10 children. Their bodies were found in such a position, one on top of the other, and only 3 of the orphans survived. But let's talk about modern times. On May 22, 2011, the city of Joplin, Missouri, was hit by a powerful tornado. It's like something out of the best American movies. The strong wind flipped cars, tore roofs off houses, and lifted small buildings into the air. The bodies of people who didn't have time to take cover were found miles away. Horrifying, isn't it? Senator Ron Richard, flying over the affected areas, noted that the tornado swept across the land like a lawnmower through tall grass. A quaint comparison, though he's somewhat right. From the air, you could see a wide brown swath. The top layer of soil was literally plowed together with buildings and cars. The tornado's width reached 1 mile, which is just incredible for such an event. As a result of this catastrophe, 158 people died, and 1,100 were injured. The losses amounted to up to $3 billion, making this tornado the most expensive in U.S. history. And where would we be without fire? On April 18, 1906, residents of San Francisco woke up at 12 minutes past 5 in the morning. They had a little time to understand what was happening before real madness began. A minute later, the city, with a population of 450,000 people, was shaken by an earthquake measuring 7.9 on the Richter scale, creating a crack 184 miles long along the San Andreas Fault. Horrifying, isn't it? The earthquake was only the beginning of a terrible disaster. Due to damaged gas pipes and short circuits in electrical grids, hundreds of fires broke out in the city. It raged for 3 days and destroyed almost 500 city blocks. When the smoke finally cleared, according to local authorities' estimates, over 3,000 people died as a result of the earthquake and subsequent fires. More than 28,000 buildings were destroyed, and over 200,000 residents were left homeless. Many had to seek shelter in makeshift cottages located in city parks and live there for several months until the city could be partially rebuilt, at least. Can you imagine how much property was lost by ordinary people? Yes, if something like this happened now, tens of thousands of cars would be burned. By the way, what should you do if you damage your car or get into a car accident in the USA? Where to turn for help? Where to find a competent lawyer? How to get compensation if you don't have insurance? The DTA America company helped its clients get $21 million in compensation. Here they will definitely answer all your questions. Link in the description. But since I've talked about fire, here's some water for you. In 1889, a tsunami unexpectedly struck central Pennsylvania, destroying the town of Johnstown with a wall of water 42.5 feet high. Within minutes, 1,600 homes were swept away and 2,209 people perished. What happened? The catastrophe was caused by a dam failure, which held back 20 million tons of water in Lake Conemaugh. This artificial reservoir was located 14 miles from Johnstown in the mountains. The lake and dam belonged to the South Fork Fishing and Hunting Club, whose members included influential industrialists such as Andrew Carnegie and Henry Clay Frick. The club had blocked the dam's drainage pipes to maintain the fish population and allowed the lake to overflow with spring rains. Yes, you understood correctly, the fishermen actually caused the deadly flood. On May 31st, the dam could not withstand the pressure and collapsed, and a huge rush of water rushed down the mountainside. The wave gained speed and force, sweeping away trees and boulders in its path. Locomotives weighing more than 70 tons were scattered under the water pressure, some eventually found a mile away from the railroad. The bodies of the deceased were found within a radius of more than 350 miles to the west. This catastrophe left a deep mark in the history of Johnstown and became one of the most terrible tragedies of its time. And where would we be without American hurricanes? Meet Sandy. This powerful tropical cyclone, born at the end of October 2012, affected many regions, including Jamaica, Cuba, the Bahamas, Haiti, the Florida coast, the northeastern United States, and eastern Canada. The northeastern states of the USA, such as New Jersey, New York, and Connecticut, were particularly hard hit. In 2012, Sandy became the 18th named tropical cyclone and the 10th in the Atlantic. It began to form on October 22nd, and within just 6 hours developed into a full-fledged tropical storm. Then the hurricane slowly moved north, heading towards the Greater Antilles, gradually gaining strength. As a result of this hurricane, more than 69 people died in the Caribbean region and the Bahamas. The total damage amounted to over $70 billion. Thousands of destroyed houses and overturned cars. Let's hope that the affected people received the necessary compensation, as not everyone had insurance. And this is what a hurricane that caused $108 billion in damage looks like. Katrina emerged on August 19, 2005. In just 5 days, it evolved from a cyclone into a tropical storm, moving across the Bahamas towards the Florida coast. On August 25th, Katrina reached hurricane status and made landfall for the first time, destroying everything in its path. On August 28th, just a day before Katrina made landfall again, the mayor of New Orleans declared a mandatory evacuation of the city. People fled, leaving everything behind. However, 150,000 people could not evacuate due to various financial and housing problems. Many of them simply did not have cars or the means to rent accommodation elsewhere. Some residents consciously chose to stay, unwilling to leave their pets or fearing for the safety of their property. Others believed that their homes would withstand the storm. No one expected New Orleans to be flooded. Katrina destroyed 53 flood control structures protecting the city from flooding. Areas below sea level were completely inundated. As the investigation showed, the destruction was caused by systemic errors in the design and construction of levees after Hurricane Betsy in 1969. Due to incorrect calculations, piles were driven to a depth of 16 feet instead of 30 to 45 feet, which saved $100 million but led to a catastrophe. Official data says 1,836 deaths. Most of them died not from the hurricane, but from flooding caused by the dam's destruction. 71% of the victims were over 60 years old, and many drowned in their homes or died due to lack of medical help, food, and clean water. Look at these scenes. In the fall of 1871, precisely on October 8th, one of the most devastating catastrophes in the country's history occurred in the upper Midwest USA. Fire engulfed about 2,360 square miles of dry land and claimed the lives of over 2,500 people. Severe drought created ideal conditions for fires, which started near the small town of Peshtigo, Wisconsin. Powerful winds fueled the flames, turning them into raging firestorms. Fire whirls jumped over barriers and water bodies. When the residents of Peshtigo heard a terrifying roar, resembling the sound of a freight train, many hastily headed to the river, hoping that water would save them from the fire. The local priest described shocking scenes. The fire jumped across the river just like it did over the land. It seemed like the air was on fire. Our safety was constantly threatened. We survived only by continuously dousing our faces and heads with water and beating the water with our hands. But unfortunately, not everyone was lucky. A group of people hiding in the water tower perished alive. Some fathers, seeing no other way to protect their families, made a terrible choice. They killed their children and themselves to avoid death in the flames. Dreadful, isn't it? The heat was so intense that the sand on the streets of Peshtigo turned into glass. Here's the largest earthquake of modern times in the USA. On August 23, 2011, at 1:51 p.m. local time, Virginia experienced a powerful earthquake with a magnitude of 5.8. The epicenter was 38 miles northwest of Richmond, near the town of Mineral. Tremors were felt in states like Michigan, South Carolina, and Massachusetts, as well as in the Canadian province of Ontario. Immediately after the earthquake, Congress and the Pentagon buildings were evacuated, as well as the FBI building in New York. In Virginia, 2 nuclear reactors were automatically shut down, and Newark Liberty and JFK airports in New York temporarily suspended flights. The earthquake caused damage to several significant buildings, including the Pentagon, the Washington National Cathedral, and Ronald Reagan Washington National Airport. The Washington Monument also suffered damage from the tremors. This earthquake became the strongest ever recorded in Virginia and the first earthquake in the history of the District of Columbia. As I've shown before, the history of the USA has seen many destructive and deadly hurricanes. However, according to a new study by the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health, Hurricane Maria, which hit Puerto Rico on September 20, 2017, may turn out to be one of the deadliest in history. Official data reports 64 deaths from the Category 4 storm, but the destruction and evidence from local hospitals suggest much higher losses. Harvard researchers surveyed 3,299 households across the island and found that the mortality rate in Puerto Rico in the months following Hurricane Maria was 62% higher than during the same period the year before. These excess deaths amounted to 4,645 people, making Maria the second deadliest hurricane in U.S. history, claiming more lives than the September 11th attacks and Hurricane Katrina combined. Disasters caused by hurricanes underscore the need for preparedness and swift response to natural calamities. And this story vividly demonstrates that their consequences can be devastating and long-lasting, especially in dense, populated areas with weak infrastructure. The drought of 1988-1989 ranks among the worst drought episodes in U.S. history. Starting in 1988 and lasting through 1989 and 1990, it affected various regions of the country. The drought caused $155 billion in damages as of 2024, triggering some of the most severe dust storms since the 1930s. In February 1988, schools in South Dakota closed due to a dust storm. In the spring, several weather stations set records for the fewest precipitation days, such as 55 rainless days in Milwaukee. Between 4,800 and 17,000 deaths occurred in the USA from simultaneous heat waves. The drought also led to numerous forest fires, including the Yellowstone fires. At its peak, the drought covered 45% of the U.S. territory. Although it was a smaller area than the famous Dust Bowl of the 1930s, which covered 70% of the country's territory, the 1988-1989 drought became the costliest in U.S. history. And it didn't end there. As soon as the heat wave subsided, rains and hurricanes began. In September 1988, Hurricane Gilbert finished off what was left. The catastrophic drought altered the landscape of many regions, especially in Yellowstone National Park. Scary, isn't it? As history shows, there's nothing scarier and deadlier than Mother Nature. People always need to be vigilant because nature cannot be controlled. And that's all for now. Subscribe to my channel, and thanks for watching.